Uh, I and uh, Tirthankar, we will talk about computational and cognitive approaches towards reading comprehension. So we understand this is an FDP on cognitive load theory, if I am correct. What we will try to talk about today, so we are computer scientists, and we do not have any formal training in cognitive science, but we use the ideas from cognitive science for to develop different computational models in relation with natural language processing or text processing. So today we will try to convey the importance of developing computational models for reading comprehension, and how inputs and understanding from cognitive science can help it. And so Tirthankar will describe some of the psycholinguistics experiments that we perform to understand the language behavior. And I will start with the introduction, that is the necessity of addressing this. So first, why do we need to understand the mechanism of language comprehension or reading comprehension? So language, as we all know, it is our mean of communication, and therefore it is also the most powerful and influencing tool. Through language, through our use of words and sentence construction, we convey our intended meaning to other human beings. So through language also we make sense of the world around us, uh, and therefore the languages that we speak, those affect not only our individual thinking, but they also shape collective cognition. So it has been observed by linguistics that actually the amount of apathy towards any outside ethnicity, a particular linguistic group of people have, if is directly correlated to the amount of the discriminatory the words the languages this particular linguistic group speaks has. So so the understanding is that the words of the languages, the concepts of a language, the language, the other characteristics of the language, they also affect how a linguistic speaker group make sense of the world, or how they develop their understanding of the world, their cognition. But yet, till this day, how do we acquire and master the language and languages, actually more than the one, so uh, so fluently and so powerfully, that remains one of the field of research from various domains of study. Because as you know that till now we haven't been able to develop natural language processing models for computers, which will perform just like humans, even with the large computational resources, complicated mathematics, deep neural networks, and very intimate feature engineering. But as human, we from our childhood we can learn like multiple languages effortlessly, through just interactions and daily use of the language, and without such large computational resources or any supercomputer. So how do we do that? So to understand that, we need to know, like, the quest is how to brain read words. So as you can see that the word read in the sentence is it is intentionally misspelled, but still we are not having any difficulty in understanding that it is actually read. We are not wondering that there can be a new word which is read or something. We are almost 100% confident that it will be how do brain read words. Or say this passage, according to a research study at Cambridge University, it does not matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and the last letter be in the right place. The rest can be a total mess and you can still read it without problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself but the word as a whole. So we can see that despite all the characters in all the words of this passage jumbled up, we can still read it with satisfactory speed. And actually, so this is another manifestation of how intriguing our language comprehension phenomena is. And actually the fact that when the first character and the last character of a word remain unchanged and all the other characters can be jumbled up, we can still process the word as a whole. It actually has a name in language comprehension or in psycholinguistics terms, which is called the Bauma effect. Bauma means shape. So it is understood that as long as for an alphabetic language like English, we have the the first character and the last character of a word unchanged, assumingly the shape of the word does not change. And as our brain try to make whole of parts, so which is called the gestalt uh, property, that if we have something by parts, we try to connect it and we try to see it as a like whole coherent picture. So our brain can read the words as the whole. Now, in this very small phenomena, like in this small passage, we can see like two of the effects of our language, sorry, two of the manifestations of our language comprehensions and how different brain phenomena is related to it, like the gestalt effect and the Bauma effect. Now, again, all this language comprehension manifestation is dependent on the language on which we are testing. So as I mentioned that this phenomena has been seen in an alphabetic language like English. Now will it hold for an Indian language which is not alphabetic and which has vowel diacritic, which has other consonant conjuncts? So will the same phenomena will hold? So we will not be sure if we don't perform study on it. So the field of psycholinguistic, as the name says, like psycho and linguistics, deals with deals with the facts that how do our like to understand the psychological or the brain processes behind our language comprehension or language uses or language behavior. Or let's read this sentence. After reading the sentence, you are now aware that the human brain often does not inform you that the word the has been repeated twice every time. You can read it for yourself, and at the first go, you will not be aware of the being always twice, and also it will not hinder your reading. So this is manifestation of another phenomena, that when we read, we actually don't stop at each of the words and read the word. We kind of have so often during examinations or quick readings, we have done the hot reading kind of thing, like where we can skip some words and jump through the passage, and still we were able to figure out like what has been written coherently. So in the same way, when we read, and these have also been observed during the eye tracker studies of reading, that when we read, we do not stop, our gaze don't stop at each of the words or characters. It kind of jumps mainly on the functional the words like the, a, and the articles or the prepositions. So it jumps those, and our brain fills up the void by its experience of the language construction that it has encountered, and we mostly concentrate on the informative the words or phrases of, of a particular text. So now with this, like as we have seen now the different language language comprehension phenomena. So now what do we mean by computational models of language comprehension? So in conventional way, we use we use machine learning to develop better NLP models, right? So what do? We try to come up with a better language model to have a better to word prediction system, or we try to come up with a parser or a sentiment classifier or a topic classifier. So in all the cases, the objective is that we give one piece of text or a corpus to a computer, and we try to come up with models. In most cases, we try to come up with models that will perform very similarly if a human was given the same task, and we tried we and the objective is to maximize uh, the accuracy of the model, or like the output of the model, or the correct outputs of the model. So this is what we mean by what we generally do when we say text processing. Now, for language comprehension, when we say computational models of that, we use our knowledge of machine learning to kind of explain the language behavior. So in this case, what do? We try to develop a computational model, again an NLP model, which will kind of simulate a particular language behavior of a person. So, say for example, in this case, we give human certain task, and like the word reading task or the passage reading task that we just saw in the previous slides, and we have a mechanism to capture the performance of the human reader. So now we have, say, the different NLP characteristics of the language or the text. We have the output performance of the reader. Now we try to come up with a machine learning model or a computational model that will be able to simulate the same input and output. Or we try to, using different statistical methods, we try to find a correlation or a connection between the output when given an input for a particular reading task. So now the thing is that how these two are related. So as we can see that if we understand that how human comprehends language, by understanding we mean that definitely we find a pattern of how human comprehend language, right? So finding a pattern means whenever we find a pattern, we can also attempt to develop a computational models using the pattern, and that computational model is nothing but a better NLP model, right? So when we say that we always annotate or benchmark our NLP task with the output of the human annotators. Now, if we can understand, say for a task like a, a simple task like topic categorization, how a human understand topic in a language, but apparently in a text passage can be a key phrase for a human reader. So then we taking inspiration from that, and if we can identify a pattern in that, we can also come up with a better topic classifier for NLP. So these two things always go hand in hand, and one complement another. Because say for example, if I want to again understand how human comprehend a sentence automatically, then it is prerequisite that I need to have a good parser, an accurate parser. Okay, so these days we have the part of speech taggers and parsers everywhere, but actually these are coming up with a very accurate parser and part of speech tagger, or even a named entity recognizer, is a challenging problem in NLP, particularly for the resource poor languages. So that's how these two are dependent on each other, and the machine learning and artificial intelligence methods, uh, they help us in kind of identifying the patterns in language comprehension. So understanding the language phenomena can help NLP, like what we think about conventional NLP in the following way. And actually some of the resource mentioned here, the word developed taking inspiration from the language behavior of human. So first is ontology. Ontology means like it's so it is a knowledge schema, right? Say if I want to have an ontology for the domain mammals, we or can all recall we have that thing like bird. So this object attribute value, a bird will have two wings and two legs. Then parrot is a type of bird and parrots can fly. Ostrich is a type of bird, but ostrich cannot fly. So it was thought that, so now where this type of schematic inspiration came from? So it was thought that we as human, we learn the schemas like that. We keep in our memory the schemas of onto like the schema of, say for the mammals subcategory, like that a mammal can be can have four legs, can have two legs, will not lay eggs, so things like that. Then those who um, um, those who are first to work in NLP must have come across the term WordNet. So, sorry, I am assuming that everyone has a basic understanding of text processing, not the computational understanding, but at least like what text processing means in a layperson's term. So, if there is any question or query, please let me know. Okay, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. So WordNet is a text processing resource which kind of have groups of similar meaning to words together, which are called synonym sets. So the idea came from the fact that in our mind we group similar concepts together, okay, or the words which means the same concept together. So, and it has a hierarchy. Say for example, in WordNet it will go like uh, uh, say like birds or aviators, so things which means similar things which can fly, so they will go together. Then the concept themselves are organized with a form of hierarchies. Then there, so these were all the, um, all the must have NLP the resources of the pre deep learning age, when we had to do the explicit feature engineering with human annotators. And in our machine learning model we need to explicitly mention that how the model should look up for similar words or close words. Then FrameNet, which is again based on the fact that how do we learn the different cases in grammar cases, or karakas, as it is called in some Indian languages like Hindi, Bangla. So the idea is that all the words of a sentence is kind of organized around the main verb. So they are defined. So their role is defined with their with their with respect to their the relation with the main verb. So if you recall, when we do parsing for English sentences, we also do it that the sentence is split around the finite verb, right? So one part goes to the noun phrase and another part goes to the verb phrase. And from the verb phrase again, we see that what is the main verb or auxiliary verb, and then what is the object phrase, which is again the noun phrase within the verb phrase. And for noun phrase we have the, and for each noun we have the adjective. So this kind of organization, that every word is defined in terms of its relationship with the verb, is the basis of the frame net, which in uh, like in earlier times used to develop the natural language understanding units, or for automatic question generation, automatic sentence generation, things like that. And then we have heard the terms like what to wake, or what we call the distributional models. So if you have not heard about what to wake, you must have heard about the thing that the with the deep neural networks model, or with the neural networks we are having better language models or better language processing units every day. So one of the underlying tenets of the deep neural network models or the distributional model is based upon the fact that how do we comprehend language, or how do we learn language. We do not have explicitly, something like WordNet saying us group similar concept together, right? What do we have? We have millions of the neurons and connections, and in our everyday life we perform certain language tasks, and from that experience and from those tasks our connections are made in such a way that when we we can store the ideas, the concept, the language structure in our long term memory, and we can reuse them whenever needed, right? So there are lots of hypotheses provided by different linguistics on how to approach this language behavior, or how do we learn language, how do we process language through our short term memory, and how do we learn the schema and store it in our long term memory. And then we also have resources like actor, which is the spreading activation model. So basically actor is, if you see different cognitive agents or expert systems, so actor is one of the foundation for that, for the underlying cognitive schema. So actor was developed in connection with the language comprehension phenomena that say for so basically Tirthankar will explain in detail, but the main understanding is that say when I so it happens to us, right? We think about a particular the word, say doctor, and then with the word doctor, a whole notion of a hospital floor, hospital bed, ICU, nurses, medicines, all these concepts also quickly comes to our mind. So it was assumed that the concept must be connected together. As you can see, the all the underlying assumption of ontology and wordnet is that all the concepts are somehow connected together. And if we kind of activate one concept, so if we kind of think of doctor, very closely related concepts, they also get simultaneously activated. And then if I say doctor and then someone says something like me like pizza, I won't be able to quickly connect them. But if someone says doctor and hospital, so I do not need to spend much effort to kind of retrieve the term hospital or connect to the term hospital with doctor. So, understanding language phenomena thus can help us in building better NLP resources, because the thing is that we have a large, we have learned, or an adult human acquires a very large vocabulary of multiple languages over lifetime, but somehow we are able to represent the vocabulary, all the concepts, schemas, all the syntactic rules of the language so efficiently that when we speak, when we switch between languages, when we connect between among concepts, we can actually retrieve all the rules, all the concepts, all the vocabulary very fast, at least faster compared to the most fast machine learning models. So how do we do that? If we can understand that how human kind of store information of a particular language, store the concepts of a particular language, rules of a language, and how human can and how this is stored so efficiently that it can be accessed and retrieved very fast, so we can have better NLP models, and maybe this will also help us in optimizing our um, or downstream NLP task too. So say for example the try data structure, lots of us we say, if you see the spell checker in MS Word, it uses something like a try data structure. So, but uh, so basically the idea is that what we do, say when we say cat, so when we first heard C, our brain start to think that what can be the next word after C. We know that almost certainly the next word after C won't be Q. It can be A. Will it be B? Not very much, not probable. So there is a probability, right? If we say certain character, what would be the next character? And then when we heard a very long word or a long phrase, we actually don't try to run through all possible linguistics combinations. We have known from our experience what are the most probable structures, and we kind of just try to have like try to understand that what will be the most accurate among the probable structures. So that the same the logic is also used in the word prediction task. Say when you do the WhatsApp messaging, you can see that you have, like when you type certain characters, you get the word suggestions, and after a point of using WhatsApp, almost that you have your very own language model, that when you type a particular the word, you get also the suggestion for the next word. So this whole idea of language model, it came from that how do we process language, like some understanding about how do we process language. And then often we do not think so that understanding our language comprehension and developing complex machine learning models, they can go hand in hand. But the deep neural networks, so we all know that why in 2000 we have the deep neural network spark, because of the the back propagation mechanism and the multi-layered idea, it was something that can be efficiently implemented in the available computational resources. So, but how the idea of backpropagation and multi-layered perceptron came into place in 1980s, David Rumelhart, and McClelland, they used something called a parallel distributory processing, which is also known as the neural networks, or like which were the part of the connectionist model, to learn the phonology of English past tense verbs. Because they said sometimes we don't follow the rules, language is full of exception to the rules. So we can all recall that, if particularly for those of us who had English as their second language, that the hard time we had while memorizing the past tense forms of the irregular verbs, right? So Rumelhart and Mackellan thought that if they can come up with a computational model using the connectionist architecture to have a system that can automatically learn the phonology of the English past tense verb. So, in other words, they use the multi-layer perceptron and backpropagation. So, David Rumelhart actually was a psychologist, and in this way, he pioneered the field of the deep neural network. So, the whole quest began in for like while developing a computational model that can retain that can learn the phonology of the English past tense verbs, uh, as we can do too. So if you can see in this 1985 paper, the co-authors are David Rumelhart and Geoffrey Hinton. So we all know Hinton as one of the pioneers of DNN. This was one of the earliest examples of uses of backpropagation. So now we can think of the language comprehension or the reading comprehension process like this flowchart. So although these are shown in a serial manner, they are not very distinct differentiations, and these processes can occur parallelly and simultaneously. Um, but for the sake of understanding, I have tried to kind of demonstrate it part by part. So let us start. What happens when we are encountered with a piece of text? So the first thing is that often we read out. If we get a new piece of text, we read out the text, or which is called first recognizing the words that is in it. So recognizing means that we at least we at least acknowledge, or we can at least associate the word. Say I am having an English text. Let's say take a common language. um, i I kind of able to associate that this is a valid word in English. So in this step, what the main processing that happens is the orthography, and the phonology. So what do? We scan through the words. We try to read the words. So basically, we need to decipher the shape of the words, right? So they at this phase we encounter the orthographic complexity, and second we try to pronounce the words. That is, we try to associate a sound to the letters, where we encounter the phonological complexity. And these two processes, they occur almost simultaneously, and it involves mainly visual and short-term memory. So we just need to add letter to the sound. Sometimes if we have an unskilled reader or unrecognized word, we do this explicitly, that is we read out aloud by and try to attach letter the sound to the letter. And if we have a skilled reader and we can recognize the words, it may happen implicitly. Okay, but we always try to add some sound to the letter. So then in the next phase comes the understanding of the words. So now I know that this is a valid word in English, but do I know the meaning of it? So there comes the morphology and the semantics. So three things can happen. So first of all, the word is sort of known to me, and I map to it an existing concept in my memory. Okay. Uh, Second, I can update my memory with new words mapping to the existing concept, which we can also call as synonym learning. So, what do we mean by that? Is a lot of the time when we don't know the meaning of a word explicitly, we try to resolve the meaning contextually, right? A practice that we always do for a new language learning. So, in this way, what we can do, we now know that the new word map to some potential existing concept, and we can add it as a synonym. And and the third thing is that the new word can point to an entirely new concept that we have not known before, and we add the concept to our memory or to our concept schema. So the question is to define the term new, that is which words and concepts are actually new, and how a word or concept is stored in the long-term memory. So in this phase, the long-term memory comes into play. So when I am saying of the new, so we need to need to come up with a computational model, or we need to explain the language comprehension. We also need to define the new. And as we are also learning of new concepts or altering the concept schema, so third, we need to access the long-term memory. And then after the words, so if we read serially, so it comes sentence comprehension after. So sentence comprehension is not equivalent to understanding the meaning of all the words in a sentence, because when we read a sentence, say from left to right, it involves broadly two types of cost. One is storage cost and another is integration cost. Say I have a 20 words long sentence, so that means when I come to the last word, I had to store all the 19 words before it. And also say I have a 20 words long sentence with many clauses, a complex sentence. So then after I read the whole sentence, or while I am reading the whole sentence, at in between I also need to properly integrate each part of the sentence. Say a clause with the noun the clause refers to actually understand the meaning of the sentence. So it involves decoding the syntactic structure, that is the width of the sentence, and depth. So depth here means that if we parse a sentence and if it is a complex sentence, it will have a larger depth. Okay, so and then we also need to understand the semantic content of the sentence, and where if again let us refer to the stage above, that if we have a new word, we also contextually resolve the meaning. So in this stage, it requires the working memory capacity and inference drawing skills, both for sentence comprehension and the whole text comprehension. Now, when we after, say, for example, I read one sentence of a paragraph, now I need to read the whole paragraph. So after reading the whole paragraph, say I have a short story. So how do I, lots of time we have the question like, to what is the moral of the story, like the Aesop's fables. So, how do we understand what is the meaning of a story, or the message of a story, or a paragraph, meaning of a paragraph in a textbook? So, there we need to decode the rhetorical structure. By rhetorical structure, it means that we have this lots of who said to whom, which concepts points to what, and lots of chaining inside a paragraph, right? So there also comes the cohesion. So that means, lots of time we find the kind of text very difficult to read, where we don't find any connection between the different parts of the text. Now, what does it mean by having a connection between different parts of the text? Or in the computational linguistics term, it is also defined as the cohesion of the text. That means, say, if a part of the text is explaining certain concepts, the and we move to the next part, we cannot have a total jump from the one domain of concepts to another domain of concepts. We need to have some connection between, even if we are explaining different concepts, we need to have some connection between that, so that the reader can move swiftly from one part to another. And then if we have a composite text, that is a blend of diagrams and text, then like, say, biology textbook, then how do we resolve that? So now we know that there are three types of cognitive loads, right? The intrinsic, the extraneous, and German cognitive load. Now, with the uses of short-term and long-term memory and working memory, and different stages of language comprehension or reading comprehension, we can also associate them to these three different types of cognitive loads too. Say, for example, intrinsic cognitive load is, so while reading or while learning a language or acquiring a language, we always move from easier concepts to more complicated concepts, right? More complicated terms and concepts in the language, because the intrinsic cognitive load also increases with that. Now, when we say the uses of words, construction of sentences. So, say, for example, in school, when they used to be taught the paragraph writing, we were always told that write short and simple sentences. The reason is that the extraneous cognitive load, that the processing, the cognitive load of processing a long and very complex sentence is higher than processing a group of short and simple sentences, because or say the use of different words, the same concepts can be represented by different synonym, all of which are not equally frequent, right, or not equally familiar to everyone. So there also, the type of synonym a writer uses can affect the extraneous cognitive load experienced by a reader, or the text structure, or the cohesion of a text. And when we are learning the new concepts at each step, we are also say this is particularly important for the educational textbook, where the objective is at step to learn new concepts and to add it to this memory schema. or the understanding of the conceptual schema, right? So there also how the textbook instructions are written that can um, affect the German cognitive load. So we can broadly think that the cognitive load associated with understanding of a text or reading comprehension depends broadly on 5 factors. So the first one is the lexical choice, which is the different complexity of different words or phrases used in a text. Second, the syntactic complexity, the structural features of a text. It depends on the nature of sen- sentences, their construction, and inherent difficulties. I think the fonts are not very legible. I'm sorry for that. I didn't realize this particular font. Like the actually, this is a picture, so it has gotten pixelated. Then semantic complexity, which represents the difficulty to grasp meaning from the words or sentences used in the text. And then the discourse level complexity depends on the text properties like cohesion, coherence, and rhetorical structure of the text. I believe now we can relate these 4 factors to this picture. So, to these different steps of reading comprehensions are different processes involved in reading comprehension, as well as the different types of cognitive loads which are interacting. And then so these 4, they also kinds of affected by the perception, attention, the memory load associated, and the inference and integration skills required. And then the fifth factor, which is perhaps the most important, is the background of the reader, because every reader is unique, and the characteristic of a reader is a complex derivative of one's educational and sociocultural background, generally modeled by mother tongue and educational qualification, etc. Because we, like in a computational model, we cannot give one sociocultural background as a numerical input, so we try to restrict, while sampling we try to define the user group in such a way that they are from the same educational qualification, same sociocultural background, or have the same mother tongue. Okay. So the applications for the language comprehension or the computational better models for reading comprehension is better education, because lots of time uh, better readable books, they also increase one's language competency or science or mathematics competency. Informed policy decisions, that if we can understand that what kind of words and sentences are comprehensible by a target group of reader, we can develop better policy manuals. And it has been observed that the cost of the different policies, they actually go up, because lots of time the instructional manuals or the information brochures, those are not uh, are designed in a way comprehensible for the common reader group. Understanding reading comprehension can also uh, favor fair representations in in language uses by so this is uh, addressed by studying how different language uses are related to the different biases that we develop or that we have, and it also will help us to generate more culture appropriate contents. So I think with that, I took quite a lot of time. Now, I think Tirthankar can take it from here. Tirthankar?
Yeah, thank you, Manjira. So let me share my slides.
I think if I
Yeah, is my screen is visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Hope the slides are also visible.
Yes,
yes,
sir. So there's a pop-up. You can switch it hide, sir.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon. So, I'm Tirthankar Dasgupta, and so I will be discussing more on the mental lexicon and the organization and processing of words in the mental lexicon. So, Manjita have already given you quite an exhaustive overview of how readability or reading comprehension complexities are computed, and one of the parameters based on which we compute the reading comprehension are the word level complexities. So now to begin with, so the difficulty, I mean, in general, the assumption is that the more difficult a word is, more difficult will be a passage or a sentence or a particular piece of text will be to comprehend. So this is a very broader assumption. We will see there are different kind of uh, uh, cases are there that we are going to discuss. Now to begin, I mean, before beginning into going into the details, I mean, just let us first look into some of the very basic well-known facts about adult vocabulary, which is already known to us, which says that, I mean, the native speakers can recognize a word in their language in less than 200 milliseconds. They can also reject a non-word in about around 500 milliseconds, and depending on the definition of a word, an adult knows and uses around 40 to 150,000 words in his or her lifetime. Now it is quite natural that collection of such a I mean so many different words, I mean surely these words are surely there should be some organizational uh, features should be there, which allows the human to search these large collection of words in their brain in such a less amount of time. So to give you another example, okay, so before going into that, I mean, so basically, I mean, the thing that we study today is called as the mental lexicon, which actually refers to these representation of words in the human mind and the various association between them that helps this kind of faster retrieval and comprehension. So to give you another example on that, so say for example, we just encounter a particular word called bat, right? And so what do you think? I mean, what are the words? What are the different other words that come up in your mind when I say this particular word as bat? So it can be bat, a cat, mat, sat, bath, ball, batsman, Sachin. It can be bird or fly, etc. Many different kind of words can be pop up in your mind or activated. Technically we call activated in our mind when we encounter one specific word. And I mean, these words, these activation of words are not entirely random. There are different kind of association between these activations, association in terms of semantics, orthography, phonology, morphology, etc., or in terms of frequency also. However, I mean, this precise nature of this activation is still unknown and very much a subject of research. So now again, I mean, before we move further, we first need to understand that when we are talking about word, their representation, first we need to understand that what actually we mean by this term called word. So what are words? Now typically our human assumption is that so words are the standalone smallest verbal gestures or smallest standalone entities to convey meaning, but they are surely not the smallest verbal gestures capable of expressing these meanings, because when we get a particular word like bat, we can add a character like s over bat to form bats, right? Which means something different from the original meaning of bat. So in this way we actually we can concatenate or we can insert different kind of strings which we typically called as suffixes or prefixes, or commonly called as affixes, with the root word to get to construct newer kind of words. And there are different ways through which we can construct newer words, and this process of constructing newer words is typically known as morphology. I am not going into detail of what morphology is and how we try to create new kind of words, but we as a since from our very basic grammar, English grammar or any language grammatical knowledge, what we know is that there can be derivationally suffix words, there can be inflections, there can be compound formations, there can be multi-word expressions and complex predicates. Now typically when we talk about words, another assumption is that given a particular piece of text, we assume that words are actually separated by spaces, right? So typically this is common observation in languages like English, or even in Indian languages also. But although in most of the cases this assumption holds true, but there are many other situations where the combination of 2-3 words itself creates a new concept, which are commonly known as multi-word expressions or maybe compound formations. So say for example, this particular word, the compound word called football, actually is composed of two different valid words, right? Foot and ball. And the meaning of this football is actually coming from the meaning of its constituent, right? So there is a ball which is played using our foot, and therefore it is called football. But at the same time, this particular assumption doesn't hold always true, because the word, say for example, words like underworld. So underworld doesn't actually mean that is there is a world which is under something. Okay, so there is a completely different notion or the meaning of this particular word underworld, and the meaning of the entire expression underworld doesn't come from the meaning of its constituent under and world. Similarly, there are multi-word expressions where two or more words, although there is a space between these two words, like grandfather, there is a space between grand and father, but still these two expressions actually combine to form a new meaningful expression, where the word grandfather doesn't entirely, the meaning of the word grandfather doesn't entirely comes from the meaning of the word grand and father. You can also think about more complex examples like Cloud9. So Cloud9 is the meaning of the expression Cloud9 doesn't really comes from the meaning of the constituent cloud and nine together, because cloud and nine, they are two different and completely entirely two different words, and if you try to combine the meaning of these two words, you are never going to reach to the meaning of Cloud9. So this particular, again, I'm not going into detail of the language processing part, but typically we call this phenomena as compositionality in natural language processing. But the question is that how our human brain works with these kind of words or expressions. Now, how as a human we can very easily understand that, okay, when we encounter football, so we should understand the meaning of this expression from its constituent foot and ball, whereas when we encounter underworld, we just say, we just don't try to form the meaning with respect to its constituent, but we try to acquire it from the other context. So for us as a human, it is very natural process, and we need to try understand that how we are going to do these things. And the entire discussion of my presentation will be on this particular thing, that when we are going to segregate words into their constituents, and when we are not going to do that. So with respect to this, there are multiple questions or problem statements are there, uh, uh, and people try to answer these type of questions, that whether a human brain has got different kind of lexicons for all these different cases. Say for example, is there different lexicon for a nouns, collection of nouns, and different lexicons are there for verbs. So do we distinguish between, do we as a human distinguish between nouns and verbs, whether they are whether the organization of the lexicon supports the distinction among grammatical categories between, say, noun, verbs, and other functional words. Then there are questions about what are the fundamental units in terms of which these words are organized. Because so we will look into those things, and answering these questions will will try to give us further towards how actually we process words, so that we should be able to answer that why some of these words are very easily recognized by us, and why some words take some more time to recognize. So which is very fundamental question. So actually, there are multiple these kind of questions are there, and many of them are still unsolved, and still a research problem, open research problem in the area of psycholinguistics. But today we are going to focus on these two fundamental questions: that what are the basic units in terms of which the mental lexicon is organized, and how these words are recognized. I mean, by recognition we mean that why some words take lesser amount of time to recognize as compared to other words. So we will see that, I mean, there are many factors that can contribute to these kind of things, although there are some computational models are already there, but today we are not going to discuss about those computational model as per se, but we will try to see that how cognitive experiments or psycholinguistic experiments have been conducted to collect data and then to analyze them to reach to some point. So again, I mean, if you have got some questions, you are free to ask. I mean, during the course of our discussion, I mean, it's better for me to interact, to have an interactive session rather than completing the entire presentation and then answer the questions. So now the question is that, I mean, why we are going to do this? Why a person from computer science is going to study these fundamental theories of word processing in the mental lexicon? So I think already Manjita has spoken a lot of applications of these things, and to just enumerate some of those things, I mean, it is very important to understand the nature of organization of the mental lexicon with respect to creating actual lexicon design for many natural language processing tasks. Very specifically, readability analysis of text requires these kind of understanding. We have already seen how these understanding can help prepare a better readability or reading comprehension models. And then there are many other applications like question answering, machine translation, and other educational applications, uh, and so on. So to begin with, I mean, so we will first start with some basic knowledge of our human memory. Uh, so the point is that we don't have, so human brain doesn't have a single memory system in our brain, but there are several functionally distinct systems which are associated together, and they work in accordance to the given task. So these different memory systems functions in different ways, depending on several factors, like what are the type of information, the duration for which they are going to store it, and the maximum amount of information that can be stored, or the capacity. So this is a very broad representation of the mental model proposed by Richard Atkinson and Shiffrin. Um, this model has been, the modal model has been proposed in late 60s, which composed of three different memory segment, which is firstly the sensory memory, then the short-term memory, and then the long-term memory. So sensor memory actually deals with sensory organs, like touch, smell, sense, kind of thing. So and here this is the kind of memory which has got the least amount of capacity in terms of amount and time through which they can store a particular sense. Okay, so once the sensory organs senses something, they directly send it to the short-term memory. And if the particular information is going to be kept for a longer period of time, then these informations are passed to the long-term memory. Now, how these how the brain decides whether a particular information is going to be stored for a shorter period of time or longer period of time depends on many other factors. And one of the thing is that it uses a phenomena called rehearsal. So once we encounter a particular information, if we want to keep it for a very longer period of time, then we typically perform rehearsal to store it to the long-term memory storage. So we will see these things with some examples. So this is the thing that I was discussing, that sensory memory is a short-term storage facility for the incoming sensory information, and it holds only information for long enough for higher level of cognitive processes. For example, this object recognition, or feeling of heat or cold, or feeling of senses, and so on. So once this information is perceived, it got passed to the working memory or the short-term memory, where the information holds for a longer duration of time, um, uh, and then it is passed to the long-term memory depending on the requirement. So the question is that how we are going to store this, and and what is the process. So say, for example, I mean, so given a particular number and we would like to remember this number for a longer period of time, so how we can do it? So naturally the process is that we perform a particular task called rehearsal. So when we observe this, or when we encounter a particular number, or a expression or a word, then we try to mentally rehearse it multiple times. And when we are going to do that, so So it stays in our brain for longer than 30 seconds, and naturally it started passing it to the long-term memory in a slow and steady fashion. And the thing is that as we lower the amount of rehearsal technique, the memory got fades out. So which is called, a process of decomposition, which we will start discuss later on. So I mean, there is a famous experiment by Peterson's short-term memory task, where participants were asked to participate in a memory test of 3 letters of nonsense syllables. Initially, they have been asked to count backward for a few seconds, and then they are initially they have been given a set of these kind of 3 letter nonsense syllables, and then they are asked to remember those things, and then they are asked to recall. And it has been seen that the amount of so when the rehearsal time is more, then the amount of retention is very high. And as we go on increasing the time, the memory is getting fading out. Okay, so now the next question is that how much can the memory is able to store the information. And again, I mean, very early studies on these aspects have been found that people can hold about around 7 plus minus 2 items in the working memory. Now again, the question is that how we are going to define the term item, right? So I mean, again, depending upon the definition of the term item and the definition of the task in hand, these the results actually varies. So it has been observed that an expert chess player can store the entire game configuration in their short-term memory for a very long period of time, whereas novice players can memorize the position of at most a few pieces within the chess game. So now naturally the question is why this thing is observed. The answer is apparently the fact that it is the ability of the person or the human being to perform these kind of rehearsal process in a specific way, and then there are differences in the working memory. So one of the examples I can give is in terms of chunking. So when we talk about remembering a particular word or particular item, it depends upon how a person is going to remember it. So one process is we have discussed about is called the rehearsal process, and the second process is called the chunking. So suppose you have been given this particular string, which is a garbage string apparently, and I ask you to remember this string for a very short period of time or for a long period of time. So apparently if you go through this particular string, it will be really very difficult for a person who doesn't know the meaning of this particular string to remember the entire string in fact for a very short period of time. But if we can intelligently perform an operation called chunking like this, so now you can, if you just observe this particular string, you will see remembering the entire string becomes very easy, because you have chunked it into TMC, then AIA, DMK, then SP, then JD, then INC. So first of all, we do this kind of chunking, and then we actually recognize particular semantics with respect to these chunkings. So these are name of some of the political parties, which I hope you already know, and then remembering these name of these political parties becomes much more easier for you rather than remembering the entire sequence of characters. So there are many different ways through which we perform different kind of operations in our working memory, which helps us to remember things in a more efficiently and more in a robust manner. Now coming back to our again the general question, so what are the fundamental units in terms of which the mental lexicon is organized? So still now what we have studied so far is with respect to words which are which has uh, which we call it monomorphic, or which are not morphologically complex in a sense. And by morphologically complex, we mean that words which are in terms of their root formation. But as previously we have discussed that we can humans as a natural language, we can form words by combining two or more words together. We can combine a word with a suffix or a prefix to form a new word, and so on. And in this way we can construct innumerable number of newer words, and therefore we say that natural language evolves over time. So naturally the question is how the human brain is going to recognize or store these kind of morphologically complex words in the brain. So there are two models for that. I mean, first model is the serial model proposed by Foster, and second is the parallel model proposed by Morton. So the Foster serial model says that we typically words are stored in the human brain with respect to their frequencies, and therefore high frequency words are retrieved very faster. So and which is a very convincing theory proposed in 1989, and we can see that it is very true that most frequent words we can very recognize very fast, whereas infrequent words takes larger amount of time to recognize, and this recognition time actually reflects the difficulty of a word also. So if a word is very infrequent, it means that it will take a higher amount of time to recognize, and which is and therefore it is going to affect the overall readability of the text. So Foster later also modified his theory in terms of the fact that words are not only arranged in terms of their frequency, but also with respect to their length also. So therefore you will see longer words also take a larger amount of time as compared to recognizing a shorter words. But there are many different counter examples to that, and people have already seen that often very infrequent words are also recognized very quickly. Secondly, also it has been observed that short words, there are many examples of shorter words taking larger amount of time as compared to longer words. For example, let us consider a word like elephant versus say Ellie. Right? So Ellie is a name of a place, whereas elephant is a name of an elephant. Right? So, but the thing is that even when people showed these two words to people. I mean, naturally, it has been observed that the word elephant has been recognized very quickly as compared to the word ele, which is a very infrequent word. So the very basic hypothesis that longer words take larger amount of time to recognize got falsified. Secondly, there are the previous assumption that frequent words are always recognized faster than infrequent word. There is a very famous example of the word beautification. Beautification is a word which you are not going to get in any dictionary, but still it is it's a valid word. And when beautification is shown with respect to very uh, uh, frequent word like say frog, so beautification has been recognized faster than the word frog. And the reason behind that is that beautification actually comes from the word beauty, and therefore this beauty is very frequent in general, and therefore the recognition may be faster. Therefore, I mean, it is the point is that there are many different factors which actually governs the faster recognition or slower recognition of words. And simply if we try to consider the effect of frequency or length or such kind of things are not going into play. So yeah, so I have discussed the things here actually, what we have discussed so far. So contrary to Morton's, this Foster's serial search model, later Morton has proposed the parallel processing model called Logogen model, which is known to be father of all other models that came into future. So Logogen model is based on a parallel processing phenomena, which says that whenever we encounter whenever we read some words, we don't read them sequentially, but there are elements within the words which are called logogens, which are actually activated in parallel fashion, right? And those logogens which actually reaches a particular threshold of activation, only those logogens got recognized, and through which we try to predict the entire word. So for example, if we encounter the word cat, actually we don't read the word sequentially as CAT, but all the individual phonemes of these words get activated in a parallel fashion, and the activation threshold and in these whenever the individual phonemes activation threshold activation values crosses a particular threshold, then we are going to capture the entire semantics of these words. So I will give you some more examples later on these aspects. So both these Foster's serial model and Morton's Logogen model are based on again examples with words with unique the monomorphic words without having any morphological complexity. Now the next question is that when we encounter morphologically complex words, how these kind of organization affects. To give you an example of these morphological complexities, let us go through these words like happiness, happier, and happy. So basically when we encounter these words, all these three words are essentially coming from the root word happy, and then we are attaching these kind of affixes, different affixes together to form new words. So the question is that how we are going to represent these words in our mental lexicon, and how the processing of these words have been done. So I am going to skip the next few slides due to some time. The idea is that the issue is that how we are going to justify or identify techniques which can give reflect the way these words are organized into the mental lexicon. And one of these techniques are called priming experiments. So priming experiments essentially results in increase in speed or accuracy of response to a target based on the occurrence of a prior exposure of prime. So say for example, if you have been given a word, the target word as mother, and before this these target words, if we follow these target word with respect to a very similar word like motherhood, uh, as compared to following the word with respect to an unrelated word like house. So the recognition of the word mother when it follows motherhood is much faster as compared to recognition of the same word mother when it is followed by unrelated word like home or house. Uh, and in this way, we actually says that this is the very basic principle of priming experiment. So just to give you within just to give you an entire flow of how this priming experiment process goes on. So we a user is encountered with the word motherhood, and then he or she has been given the word the target word as mother, and you have been asked to you have been asked that whether mother is a valid word or not. So there is a question that whether the word mother is valid or not, and within a very specific period of time, the user has to uh, uh, respond that whether mother is a valid word or not. Similarly, again, the same word mother is going to be shown to the user at a later period of time, and but in this case, the word is preceded by another unrelated word, mother, which is called future. So, and again, we are going to measure the response time, and once we measure both the response time, we try to compare these two reaction times. And the hypothesis is that if the response time of motherhood versus mother is less than the response time of future versus mother, then we say that a priming phenomena actually occurs. And it has been seen that in most of the cases, if morphologically derived words are followed by the root word, if this is the situation, then this priming phenomena is observed, and which says that actually human brain tries to decompose words into their constituent rather than storing the words in their mind as a whole. So I think my time is over. So I am going to stop here right now. So if there is any other question, we are free to, and will be happy to answer.
Sir, one question.
Yes.
When our brain try to understand the complex word, whether more neurons are fired compared to simple words, and this is related to machine learning. That is, if we if machine try to understand a complex and simple word using deep neural network, then whether it dynamically, whether there is any method to prepare a dynamic neural network or neural network.
So to answer the first question, I mean whether a higher number of neurons are going to be fired if we are encountering a morphologically complex word as compared to its root form, the answer is yes, because it depends upon the features that are going to be activated. So as I was discussing in the Logogen model, so every word has got certain features which are not exactly all the characters. It can be characters, it can be the phonemes, it can be the syllables. We technically call it access representations. So it depends upon how many access representations are going to be activated for a morphologically complex word. Typically, since a morphologically complex word is longer than its root form, so higher number of access representations can or should be activated. But it doesn't mean that always the thing is like that. It is often observed that, see, the features can be in terms of, as I was mentioning, that it can be characters, it can be the phonemes, it can be the syllables, or it can be the entire word also. So often entire word can be activated as a whole. So it actually depends upon the linguistic properties of that word through which it is going to be measured, how many neurons are going to be fired. So what was your second question?
Second question, if we implement to recognize a word in the form of machine learning or deep learning tool,
Yes.
then can we vary the number of neurons? Whether there is any model, available model, or
So
fixed layers and nodes, can we vary during the recognition process?
yes, so see, in terms of layer, we can always vary because the architecture is in our hand. So we will decide how many layer we are going to keep. The issue is that whether we are going to get better results at which level. So increasing the number of layers can sometimes give you a better recognition as compared to, but in many of the cases, a lower number of layers can give you a better recognition. It actually depends upon the language also. So it's not that simple answer.
How many maximum layer we can take in a deep neural network?
So again, it depends upon the problem that which you are going to tackle. So how many number of features are there? So if you are going to take different orthographic features, then obviously number of layers has to be increased. If you are taking only English words, then lesser number of layers is going to be required. If the language is very complex, then higher number of layers is going to be needed.
There is